And we are back with part two of this week's Shabbat service on December 12th, 2020. And this is for Waymaker Messianic Jewish and Christian Center USA. It is also Kislev 26 in the year 5781. And we're reading the Torah portion. This is actually the first segment, actually, of Shabbat service, but it is part two on the recording. Now we're going to talk about Judah and Tamar in chapter 38. About that time, Judah went down from his brothers, and he camped near an Adullamite man whose name was Hira. There, Judah saw the daughter of a Canaanite man whose name was Shua, and he took her as wife and slept with her. Then she became pregnant and gave birth to a son, and he named him That's E-R. She became pregnant again and gave birth to a son, and she named him Onan, O-N-A-N. She gave birth to yet another son and called him Shelah, Shelah. He was in Kazib when she gave birth to him. Then Judah got a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was evil in Adonai's eyes, so Adonai put him to death. Then Judah said to Onan, "Go to your brother's wife to perform the duty of a brother-in-law to her, and raise up a seed for your brother." We're going to talk about this levirate marriage because this was the practice. We'll talk about that in a little bit when I recap. But Onan knew that the seed would not be his, so every time he went to his brother's wife, he would destroy it on the ground, so as not to provide a seed for his brother. What he did was evil in Adonai's eyes, so he put him to death also. Then Judah said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, "Stay as a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah grows up," because he thought otherwise he might too die like his brother. So Tamar went and stayed in her father's house. Now the days became many, and Shua's daughter, Judah's wife, died. After Judah consoled himself, he went up to Timnah to his sheep-shearers, he and his friend Hira the Adullamite. Then Tamar was told, "Look, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his flocks." And she removed her widow's clothes from herself, covered herself with a veil, and wrapped herself, and sat by the entrance to the springs on the way to Timnah. For she saw that Shelah had grown up, and she had not been given to him as a wife. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute because she had covered her face. So he turned aside to her along the way and said, "Please let me sleep with you." For he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. "What?" she asked. "Will you give me to sleep with me?" "I will send you a young goat from the flock," he said, "provided you give a pledge until you send it," she said. "What kind of pledge shall I give you?" he asked. "Your steel, and your cord, and your staff, and your hands," she said. So he gave them to her, and he slept with her, and she got pregnant by him. After she got up and left, she removed her veil from herself and put on her widow's clothes. When Judah sent the young goat by the hand of his friend, the Adullamite, to take back the pledge from the woman's hand, he could not find her. He asked the men of her area, saying, "Where is the cult prostitute? She was at the springs along the way." But they said, "There hasn't been a cult prostitute here." So he returned to Judah and said, "I couldn't find her." And the people of that place also said, "There hasn't been a cult prostitute there." Then Judah said, "Let her take them for herself, or we'll be held in contempt. Behold, I did send this young goat, but you couldn't find her." About 3 months later, Judah was told, "Your daughter-in-law Tamar had has been a prostitute. Look, she's even pregnant by prostitution." "Bring her out," Judah said, "and let her be burned." And she was being brought out. As she was being brought out, she sent word to her father-in-law, saying, "I'm pregnant by the man to whom these things belong." Then she said, "Do you recognize whose these are, the seal, the cords, and the staff? Then Judah recognized them and said, She is more righteous than I, since I didn't give her my son Shelah. He was not intimate with her again. Now, when it was time for her to give birth, behold, there were twins in her womb. While she was giving birth, one stuck out his hand, and the midwife took a scarlet thread and tied it to his hand, saying, This one came out first. But as he was pulling his hand back in, behold, his brother came out. So she said, How you have broken through. The breach is because of you. And he named him Perez. Afterward, his brother, on whose hand was the scarlet thread, came out, and he named him Zerah. Now we're back to Joseph in chapter 39. Joseph succeeds in adversity. Now Joseph had been brought down to Egypt. Potiphar, an official of Pharaoh, commander of the bodyguards, brought him from the hand of the Ishmaelites, who had brought him down there. But Adonai was with Joseph. So he became a successful man in the house of his master, the Egyptian. His master saw that Adonai was with him, and that Adonai made everything he set his hand to successful. Joseph found favor in his eyes, so he served him as a personal servant, and he made him an overseer over his household. Everything that was his he entrusted into his hand, from the time that he made him an overseer in his house and over everything that belonged to him. Adonai blessed the Egyptian's house because of Joseph. Adonai's blessing was on everything that belonged to him in the house and in the field. So he released everything he owned into Joseph's hands. With him in charge, he did not think about anything except the food he ate. Now Joseph was handsome in form and handsome in appearance. Now after these things, the master's wife lifted up her eyes at Joseph and said, Come lie down with me. But he refused. Look, he said to his master's wife, My master doesn't think about anything in the house with me in charge, and everything that belongs to him he's entrusted into my hand. No one in his house is greater than I, and he has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. So how could I commit this great evil and sin against God? So whenever she spoke to Joseph day after day, he did not listen to her invitation to lie down beside her, to be with her. Now, on one such day, he came into the house to do his work, and none of the people of the house were there in the house. Then she grabbed him by his garment, saying, Come lie with me. But he left his garment in her hand, fled, and went outside. When she saw that he had left his garment in her hand, she and fled outside, she screamed to the men of her house and said to them, Look, someone brought a Hebrew man to us to fool with us. He approached me to lie with me, so I screamed out loud. When he heard me raise my voice and scream, he left his garment with me, fled, and went outside. And she kept the garment with her until his master came home. She spoke the same words to him, saying, The Hebrew slave that you brought us approached me to fool with me. When I raised my voice and screamed, he left his garment with me and fled outside. Now when his master heard the words, his wife spoke to him, saying, Such are the things your slave did to me. His anger burned. Then Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, in the place where the king's prisoners were confined. So there he was, in the prison. But Adonai was with Joseph and extended kindness to him, and gave him favor in the eyes of the commander of the prison. The commander of the prison entrusted into Joseph's hand all the prisoners who were in the prison, so that everything that was done there he was responsible for. The commander of the prison did not concern himself with anything at all under his care, because Adonai was with him, and Adonai made whatever he did successful. And the last chapter is chapter 40, Interpreter of Dreams. Now it was after these things that the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt offended their master, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with his two officials, with the chief of the cupbearer and with the chief of the baker, so he put them into the custody of the house of the commander of the bodyguards in prison, the place where Joseph was confined. The commander of the bodyguards assigned Joseph to be with them and served them as their personal servant. They were in custody for some time. Then the two of them each dreamed a dream on the same night. The dream of each man, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were confined in the prison. Each had its own interpretation. When Joseph came to them in the morning, he observed them, and there they were, looking miserable. So he asked Pharaoh's officials who were with him in the custody of the house of his master, saying, "Why are your faces so sad today?" They said to him, "We dreamed a dream, and there is no one to interpret it." And Joseph said to them, "Don't interpretations belong to God? Please tell me." So the chief of the cupbearers told his dream to Joseph, saying to him, "In my dream, suddenly there was a vine in front of me. On the vine were three branches, and as it was building, each blossom came out, its clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes, pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and put the cup in Pharaoh's palm." "This is the interpretation," Joseph said to him. "The three branches, they are 3 days. In another 3 days Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your position. Then you'll put Pharaoh's cup in his hand, just as you used to do before when you were his cupbearer. But if you remember me, that I was with you when it goes well with you, please show me kindness and mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this house. For I was forcibly kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing at all that they should put me in this pit." When the chief of the bakers saw that the interpretation was good, he said to Joseph, "I also was in my dream. Expectantly there were 3 baskets of white bread on my head. In the top basket was food for Pharaoh, all kinds of baked goods, but the birds were eating them from the basket on my head." Then Joseph answered and said, "This is its interpretation. The 3 baskets, they are 3 days. In another 3 days Pharaoh will lift up your head off of you and will hang you on a tree. Then the birds will eat your flesh off of you." Then it happened on the 3rd day, Pharaoh's birthday, that he held a banquet for all his servants. He lifted up the head of the chief of the cupbearers and the head of the chief of the bakers among his servants. He restored the chief of the cupbearers as his cupbearer and put the cup on the palm of Pharaoh's hand. But the chief of the bakers he hung. It was just as Joseph had interpreted for them. Yet the chief of the cupbearers did not remember Joseph. Indeed, he forgot him. And that's the end of the Torah reading. And I'm going to do a little bit of a recap here with that. So this Torah portion actually opens up where Joseph is young. He's very young. He's a teenager, actually, age 17. And actually, he was the favorite of Jacob. Um, he was the firstborn between Jacob and Rachel, because Rachel and Jacob had Joseph and Benjamin. Benjamin was the youngest. So Joseph was serving as a shepherd with his brothers, and he grew up. Um, he grew up among them. The with the children of the maidservants. Joseph actually kind of gave a bad report that his brothers, um, with Bilhah and Zilpah. So Joseph was born late in Jacob's life, and um, he actually was his favorite. So Joseph made him, Jacob made Joseph a coat of many colors. So his brothers kind of interpreted this as he had special status with their father. So they were jealous. They hated him. Um, God was giving Joseph dreams. Um, and So Joseph was dreaming, and he told his brothers of 2 dreams. The first one, his brother's sheaves rose up and then they bowed to Joseph. So that really made them angry. And the second was the sun, moon, and 11 stars all bowing before him. So Jacob too scorned that dream, and so did his brothers. And one day Jacob had sent Joseph to seek out his brothers who were tending to the sheep, and this is when it didn't go too well for Joseph because his brothers had plotted to do him in actually. But Reuben actually did not want anything to happen to Joseph, and he wanted to actually bring him back to his father. So he actually talked his brothers into just putting him into a pit for the moment because he intended on actually taking him back to his father. But while he was not present, they sold him. Judah actually came up with the idea to sell him rather than kill him um, into slavery, which that's what happened. And so when Reuben came back, he was realized that his plan to get his brother back to his father did not work out, and his brother had already been gone. So he tore his clothes, and they all agreed that they would tell Jacob that he was killed by a wild animal, and so they did kill an animal and a goat and covered the goat's blood all over to show their father that is this your son's coat? And of course, Jacob recognized it, and he was in mourning for Joseph for quite some time. Then the Torah jumps to Judah and Tamar, and the Levirate. So it was custom that if a man died and left a widow, that if there was a brother, the brother would, and if there was no children, the brother would actually marry the sister-in-law. And when she got pregnant, that first child was the seed dedicated to the deceased brother. So as we notice, what happens um, in this story, Judah had gone and married Shua. He marries the daughter of a merchant named Shua, and she gives him three sons, Er, Onan, and Shelah. Shelah was considerably much younger than the other two, because Tamar had to wait for him to grow up. In other words, as we see what Judah instructs her to do. Was did made God angry. He did evil in the sight of God, and God killed him. And so Onan was supposed to actually marry his brother's widow and um, provide the first child in honor of his brother, and that was following the Levirate marriage. But Onan didn't want to do that, so God killed him as well. So meanwhile, Judah is um, tells Tamar that she needs to remain a widow and go stay at her father's house. And when Sheila is old enough, he will give Sheila actually will marry her. Um, but Judah kept making excuses for this not to happen once Sheila was actually grown up, and that was supposed to happen. So as time goes by, Tamar realizes Judah had no intention of allowing her to marry Sheila at all. Yet she cannot marry outside of Judah's family. So she's kind of feeling like she's trapped and all. So she decides to take action, and taking advantage of Judah when his wife Shua dies. He was grieving over the loss of his wife, and so she disguised herself as a prostitute when he went to Timnah, to the sheep shearers, and he decided to comfort himself with a prostitute, and that was ended up being Tamar. But she actually entrapped him by having his staff, his signet, and his cord. as she was going to keep that until he brought the goat, but she had already gone back, put back her put put back her widow's clothes on and left. So Judah could not bring the goat to her. Um, and anyway, what happens is as time goes on, it's discovered that Tamar is pregnant, and Judah was going to actually put her to death because of she got accused of prostitution, and when she confronted him with the fact that the owner of the staff, the signet, and the cord was Judah himself, um, he basically said that Tamar was more righteous than I was in this situation. I did not do what I said that I would. So Tamar gives birth to twins, Perez and Zerah, and that is Judah and Tamar. Now, the Davidic line starts here. It is Perez who is the forebear of the Davidic line. He's the one that caused the breach, too, by the way, in birth. At a time when life seems to be unraveling, God works behind the scenes, too, to ensure future's redemption. And actually, that is absolutely what happened, because this is also the line that continues to Yeshua. So then the Torah goes on to Joseph. There's so much that happens in the Torah here. Torah, Joseph actually gains a lot of respect from Potiphar, and he gives him a lot of responsibility. But Potiphar's wife is attracted to Joseph and, wants to have an affair with him. And Joseph was, a righteous, godly man, and he did not want to, be partake in that, and he didn't want to betray Potiphar. And he told her so. So the one day when there was no one in the house, she basically came on to him, and he went to flee, and he left his garment in his garment came off, and she had it in her hands, and she claimed that he tried to seduce her, and he got thrown into prison. While he was in prison, he met the Pharaoh's butler and baker, who made the Pharaoh unhappy, and they were sent to prison. But he interpreted. God was allowing him to interpret dreams, and this is preparing him for what he was going to do, and what we're going to see in future Torah readings as we continue with Joseph. But he absolutely prophesied correctly, 100% correctly. The cupbearer, he said, would be restored in 3 days, and that did happen. And the baker, he said, would not be restored. He would actually have his life taken from him and be hung on a tree, and that happened in 3 days as he had predicted. So this is the end of the Torah portion. We're going to end this segment and take a short break and come back with a Haftorah, Brit Kadashah, altar call, and then close out Shabbat. Father God, thank you for allowing us to come together today. And this is such an exciting parashat today toward teaching. And we can see this is a type and shadow also of Yeshua when we look at Joseph. So we thank you for your mighty word in the mighty name of Yeshua. Amen and amen. Take a short break and come on back, and we will begin the second segment of Shabbat service.